Okay, so one other thing you might need to do for this assignment is that you may want to you may need to find your own image and use that as an texture file to be placed on the surface of certain models, such as this wall. For example, if we take a look at our example file, here on the wall there are these images of clouds, right? They are painted on the walls, or in some other cases they might be photographs or wallpapers or some other book covers, for example, that you may wish to create. And in these cases, then we need to use images as texture files. So uh, for example here, I downloaded this sort of a classic Windows XP desktop image to be used as a texture in my walls here. Okay, so to do that, again, it's better to attach images on the planes because this is a very simple assignment. To attach objects, attach images on more complex 3D shapes, even if it's just a cube or a sphere, requires more modification to the models and to the texture files. So those are more complex steps involved. Here, we're just attaching the image to a simple plane. That way, it looks like we can brought in a photo or an album cover or wallpaper into the 3D scene. So let's see our example file here. The floor and this wall have been assigned a material that is a ready-made material that I found, through the Blender Kit library. But this wall doesn't have any material attached to it. If you look at the this icon again, which represent the material properties, there's nothing here that we need to create by ourselves using some simple methods. So first, we just click New here, which will create a new material and assign to this object. Okay, so here we can see that this is a sort of a standard principal material in Blender, and it has a lot of different kinds of settings. Here we don't need to worry so much about them. So here in the base color, uh, right now it's set to the default almost white color, and of course we can simply change this color wheel to change the surface to another color. So this is the one of the most basic way to change the look of the material. But then instead of just one color, we can also use an imported image to determine the surface color of this model. So to do that, let's click on this dot, and then you'll see an expanded menu. Here we want to find image texture. Just click on that. So now we've connected an image texture uh, into this material, which will allow us to open up an image file to be used for the surface color information. So all we need to do here is simply click open and then find the image that we downloaded that we wanted to use as the texture and just open that. So that's very simple, but then we notice that the image is not in the correct position and size. Usually, the more sort of a correct way or a more advanced way is to modify the UV, what's called UV, of the 3D models. Or we can also change the way of projection. Um, but here we wanted to just keep it simple. So why not? Why don't we just sort of rotate the plane itself rather than doing anything too complicated, right? So we can just simply rotate our plane, and maybe we want it to be more precise. Then we go to the uh, object properties and type in the exact number, and then we want it to also resize it so that it looks more like a correct shape. Okay, so here we go, and it's as simple as that. Now we brought in this image that we found somewhere else and use that as the surface color information for our 3D model, in this case a plane. But then if you wanted to change a few more things, you can follow along here. So for example, if you have a light in your scene, in this case maybe a point light, and let's change our shading mode to render so we see the effects of the lights, and let's increase its power to 200 and then maybe the radius to something like 10 or 2. Okay, this should be enough, and then we move it closer to this wall. So you can see that there is a few things that we can still change on this wall. So if we go to the material tab of this plane, the first one is called the roughness. So the roughness determines how reflective the surface of this model would be. So for example, if I decrease the roughness all the way to 1, you can see that it's very shiny and it's highly reflective. And if I decrease the size or the radius of the slide, you can see that it's reflecting also on this plane. And if we increase the roughness, then the reflection will sort of become softer and softer and until it almost totally disappeared. Okay, because it's a very rough surface and you won't see any reflection so clearly. Okay, and if we decrease the roughness to something like this, and if we change another setting here, which is the specular, you can also see that it has an impact on the reflection. The larger the specular number, if it's all the way to 1, then it has a very strong reflection effect because it's highly specular. If it decreases, then the specular or the reflection effect will also decrease until it disappeared. Another thing that you may want to consider is the metalness, in this case the metallic setting here, which determines whether something is made out of metal or not. So 0 meaning that it's not made of metal, so it could be something like wood or plastic. But if you increase the metalness, you'll see that the surface becomes somewhat closer to a metal. You can actually see the quality of reflection become somewhat different now. Okay, it looks more metal-like. So these are the 3 other settings that you may consider changing when you are creating your textured material. At the end, I wanted to also show you the shader graph that's available in Blender, which is a more advanced way of composing our shaders or our materials. And to see the shader graph, we can simply check the top of our menu, where it says shading, which will change our Blender UI into the shading mode. So if we click that, we can see that here we are still looking at our 3D scene, but at the bottom part, we see a graph which is displaying how the material is made of. And you can see we get the same attribute list that we previously seen here. It's the same list, but then all the other attributes, such as this image file that we previously loaded in as a texture, will show up as another node here. And this is a very powerful environment for us to create our shader. For example, if we look at our other plane, and we see that its material, the wood material here, is made out of a more complex shader graph. So different nodes kind of serve as different functions to create different effects. Similarly, we can also look at this plane, and it's a more sort of brush metal material. Okay, and to go back to the regular modeling layout, you can just simply click on the layout tag here, which will go back to your regular working environments.